Good morning, everyone. It's a privilege, it's an honor, it's fun to be here this morning moderating a very important panel about the judicial reform in this incredible movement of Mizrachi. And congratulations for celebrating 120, many years to come. We begin this morning in this subject that tears the country apart, tears the Israeli society apart. Everyone that were walking on the street of Jerusalem last night was facing a mass demonstration of hundreds of thousands of people, this time in favor of what's happening now in Israel, the judicial reform. Some say that Israel was taken over by the court system, that Israel turned into a dictatorship by the Supreme Court, by the legal advisor, by the judiciary, and it's time to bring it back to where it was before, bring back the balances and checks, makes Israel a democracy again. But some say that if Israel goes through a judicial reform, it will turn itself to a dictatorship because there won't be any checks and balances anymore, because the politicians will control everything. They will have the power and there will be nobody to restrain them. So to have this discussion in favor and against, I would like to call to the stage two prominent professional people that have been discussing this judiciary reform in favor and against, not much against, but a little bit, that can enlighten us this morning about this issue. So Professor Yedidia Stern is a full professor of the Faculty of Law in Bar-Ilan University and a former dean of the faculty. He is the president of the Jewish People Policy Institute, which is a center of thought and planning for shaping strategy and action-oriented policy for the Jewish people in Israel and diaspora. The second one is Dr. Moshe Koppel, which is a professor emeritus in computer science at Bar-Ilan University. And he is the founding chairman of the Kohelet Policy Forum, which is a pro-Zionist and pro-free market think tank. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome to the stage Professor Stern and Dr. Koppel. So Dr. Koppel, good morning. We will start with you. We'll start with you because the Kohelet Forum that you are heading is one to blame for this judiciary reform. You proposed a reform, and it was adopted by the government. And now, look what happens. And my question to you is, why do we need a judicial reform? What was wrong in the past 75 years of the state of Israel that suddenly the legal system has to change?
Okay, thank you for that question, Nitsana. Thank you for the invitation. So I'll get right down to business. I was asked a technical question. I'll give a technical answer. What's wrong with the balance of powers now in Israel that calls for a reform? The answer is very simple. You need every democratic government needs balance of powers between the different branches of government, checks and balances between them. So you have the three branches of government being the judiciary, the executive, and the legislature. Let's put the judiciary on one side, the legislature and the executive, which are the elected branches of government, on the other side, and say, what are the checks and balances between them? Well, in every democratic country, there's some kind of judicial review where the courts need to rule on cases and controversies, and if there's a constitution, they have to weigh constitutional legislation against ordinary legislation. Sometimes they'll come to the conclusion that some ordinary statutes are unconstitutional. They will have to consider administrative decisions and actions and whether they were done legally and so forth, and all that is subject to judicial review. Those are the checks and balances that the courts have on the other branches of government. But of course, the reason you want to have this kind of checks and balances is because you understand that members of the legislature and the executive are just human beings. They're fallible. They could do bad things. But for that same reason, one needs to have checks and balances on the courts. And even more so, because there is one fundamental check and balance built into the elected branches, which is they need to get reelected. The courts, in general, they're always long-term positions. Sometimes there are term limits, but for the most part, they are very long-term. In the United States, they're for life. In Israel, until the age of 70. So what are the checks and balances that you have on judges? And the answer is that in other countries, not in Israel, there is a long list of checks and balances. I'll review them very quickly. First of all, not everything is justiciable. There are certain cases, there are certain authorities that are naturally belong to the elected branches of government, things and matters of foreign relations and war and peace and much more, that the courts will simply not get involved in. They'll say, we don't deal with such matters. They're not justiciable. There are other things, the court will often not hear a case because it was not brought by somebody with standing. That is, the court will only hear a petition if the person who brought the petition was directly and personally affected by some government policy or by some law. Otherwise, you can't petition the court against the state. Third of all, there are limits on the grounds on which the courts will get involved. So, for example, the court will only strike down a law if the law is unconstitutional. Fourth of all, the court will only get involved in administrative actions if the administrative action did not stand by a very specific list of rules that apply to such matters. They're not just going to come and say, well, we don't like that administrative action. Fifth, well, the courts in almost every democratic country in the world are, the judges are appointed by some combination of the executive and the legislature. In some places it's only the executive, some places only the legislature, and in other places it's a combination. So as you know, in the United States, for example, the president will nominate and the court, and the Senate will have to either ratify or not, okay? There are other things which I'll discuss, but in any event, the important thing to know is that all five of these limitations on the court do not exist in Israel. I'll go through it very quickly. First of all, in 1986, in a case called Ressler, the second Ressler case, it came up in 81. The court, Ressler sued the state because Haredim were not being drafted into the army, at least Haredim who are learning in yeshiva. And Ressler said, well, I don't like that policy. In 81, the case was thrown out, both because it was not justiciable. It's not the kind of, it's the kind of issue that the other branches of government are supposed to make policy on. Also because Ressler didn't have standing in the court's view. In 86, the case came back. And Aaron Barak, at the time, an ordinary justice, subsequently, as you all know, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, said, Hakol Shafit, everything is justiciable, and everybody has standing in his courtroom, including Ressler, who had already been thrown out earlier.
So it looks like, Professor Stern, maybe there is a need for reform. If you say that the judges appoint themselves, they can cancel laws, they can cancel acts of the government for being unreasonable, perhaps there is a place for a change.
Yes, there is a place for a change. The question is what kind of a change? When you have a problem, what do you do with the problem? Do you fix it or do you kill it? So when Justice Minister Yariv Levin came up with his reform. It's okay, in a minute I'll be hot and everything, and you'll hear. Takes time. You can help me.
Yeah, maybe you can adjust the microphone a little bit.
When the Justice Minister 4 months ago came up with his first stage of 4 stages. And the first one has 4 issues, which are the issues we are fighting right now. I turned to my dear wife. I told her, listen, what so far was a cultural war between the tribes of the State of Israel, Chas v'Chalila might turn into a civil war. She knows me as a calm person, rational, never shouts, as you can tell. And she told me, Yedidia, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? This is a legal reform, so they want to change the balance. I told her, Karen, this is going to be worse than the Oslo Accord, with the assassination of Rabin, and worse than the disengagement from Gush Katif. So the question is, what's wrong? Why I was so worried, and apparently, to some degree, right. And I want to make it very simple. Even if you agree, and I tend to agree with many things that Moshe says. Actually, Rabbi, we are exactly what you're talking about. We are friends from the same shul originally, before we left the holy place to Efrat. And we're friends for many years. Obviously, he's a patriot. I believe he will say the same about me. We have differences in understanding reality. That's all. And we're arguing, which is fine, which is a very Jewish thing to do. So what is so threatening to people like myself and to, let's say, half the country? In Israel, you do not have a constitution. You do not have rules for the game. We do not agree about the future of the State of Israel, about the vision of this place, about the aim, the goal eventually. We do not agree. We have different opinions, but we do not have rules how to conduct our dispute. Therefore, whenever one of us is becoming a prime minister, he or she can change all the rules and conduct Israeli politics and the decision-making process the way he or she wants. It's obviously threatening, shifting sands. So far, we have 3 branches, right? Montesquieu. 2 of them in Israel are one. The government and the Knesset, the parliament, are basically one arm. This is reality, not theoretically, in reality. Why is that so? I have many reasons to give you, but it's very simple to know that the most important Knesset members are ministers. So there's no check and balances between the 2, generally speaking. So the only thing that can protect me, Yedidia, as an individual, Adam, or as a citizen, Ezrach, or as part of minority, guys, we are minority here, who will protect my minority, which is your minority, when the majority will decide to go against us and say things that will be really, really hurting for our belief system? Who will protect us? We do not have any trick but the judiciary in Israel. Now, the judiciary may have overacted in the past. Here we agree. So what do you want to do? To change the balance or to subject the judiciary to the prime minister? It's not important which prime minister. It might be me. A prime minister has the power in Israel to do whatever he or she wants unless the court will be there to stop it. Hobbes was talking about the Leviathan who owns the power. In Israel, nobody can protect the individual from the Leviathan but the judicial. So here you go. Here's the answer to your question.
So, Dr. Koppel, this makes sense. If the power will be handed to the politicians, to the government, the politicians will be able to do whatever they want, to legislate any law they want, to act the best way they would like, and nobody will be there to overview their acts, to restrain them. You know, the fear is turning Israel to a halachic state. Women's rights will be harmed, LGBTs, Arab rights, minority rights. There will be no one to protect them. We are losing the last shield.
Yeah, the problem with that argument is that it actually assumes the conclusion. Okay, the question that you have to ask yourself, well, there are three branches of government. Oh my God, the Knesset and the government might do horrible, horrible things. What are we going to do? There's only one branch of government that can save us, and that's the judiciary. Well, why don't you ask another question? The judiciary can do anything it wants. They have the final word on every issue, without exception. Why aren't we worried the judiciary is going to be doing horrible things to us? Who's going to check them? Who checks them now? What happens now after the Supreme Court has issued a decision on whatever matter it is? What recourse do we have? Can the Knesset do anything? Can the government do anything? The answer to that question is no. So why doesn't that concern you? So it's customary in the United States, for example, one thinks of the court as the least dangerous branch, to take a quote from the Federalist Papers, because the court's power is limited. It can only rule on cases that come before it, only when somebody has been directly affected, only when the matter is justiciable, only on grounds that a law violates the Constitution or that an administrative act is illegal. But in Israel, since we don't have any of these restrictions, the court actually can weigh in on every issue, and it does weigh in on every issue, and the court can weigh in a way that's completely unbalanced, that doesn't reflect the views of the citizenry, that doesn't protect the rights of people. I'll begin with one example, but there are many more examples. You already heard this example, so he's ready for it. We have a dog and pony show. I don't know who's the dog and who's the pony, but here's a case that came before the court 2 years ago. Kohelet was one of the petitioners, so I'm intimately familiar with this. The question was whether a college, including a private college that doesn't get state funding, by the way, could have classes for Haredim that were separated by gender, right? Men and women. I went to YU. I studied in separate classes. Nothing happened to me, nothing happened to YU, nothing happened to the democracy in the United States. The case came before the court because colleges wanted to do it. There was a petition against them by a feminist group that said that shouldn't be allowed. They shouldn't allow gender separation because we have there is a law, by the way, that says that you can have gender separation in higher education in Israel for religious purposes. There is a law. However, the court ruled that since there's basic law, kvod adam v'cheruto, human dignity and freedom, there's no dignity without equality, there's no separate but equal, and consequently, they could only have separate classes in specific instances where the court allowed it, meaning in specific majors and specific degrees, but it was all subject to judicial review. Understand what the court is saying here is that even for religious reasons, you can't have gender separation. That means that in principle, the court could tomorrow morning decide that you can't have gender separation in a shul or in a beis medrash or anywhere else. Okay, so that's just one example. I will give you many more examples of cases where the court, you can't check the court, no balances on the court, there's no review of what the court says, and the court is violating the religious rights of
Professor
citizens of the
Sten,
State of Israel.
I can add to this. As you know, I was a law student in your university.
I was privileged to be a teacher.
And already as a law student, I appeared before the Supreme Court. You became a dean right after, arguing cases against the Oslo Accords at the time, and later on in Shurat HaDin, we've been filing a lot of Supreme Court, High Court petitions, and we've been practicing in the court. And indeed, the court seems to put its view, its opinion, instead of the authority, and there are no check and balances against its decisions.
Okay, so we have two major establishments affecting our life, everywhere and in Israel. One in Israel is the government and the Knesset, and the other is the judiciary. And the question is how to balance the two. So Moshe, my friend, is saying the main threat is the judiciary. And I'm saying the opposite. That's the discussion here. Now, try to figure out what you think about it. Who has the money? Who makes the policy? Who decides what the law is? Who tells me how much money I have to pay every month for taxes? Who sends my kids to war? Who decides what the Shabbat will look like? On and on and on. The court is very active, and I agree. Sometimes overstepping its authority. But tachlis, the court is interpreting the law, that's all. Maybe he's doing it in a very active way. Okay, let's tame it. So my answer is obviously, the threat is much bigger from the government and from the Knesset, especially when the two are one. That's, to me, very simple. It doesn't mean that I don't have criticism to the place of the judiciary in Israel. So the balance I think we should go for is not to take over the judiciary by the politicians. This might be too dangerous for us. And there is no way back, ever, unless you use force, chas v'chalila. The answer should be, or the right balance should be, I think, to keep the integrity of the court as independent, but, Moshe, to change the authority of the court, take away, and I can elaborate, take away some of the powers of the court and move it to the parliament and to the government.
Yeah, maybe in briefly can you point out some points. How do you think you can compromise on this issue?
Okay, so a few examples. First of all, I think we should tell the judges stay in power only a limited time. I suggest 12 years. Aaron Barak, my friend, my teacher, dear person, patriot, the one who cares a lot about the Jewish nature of the state, despite whatever people do to him, demonize him. But he shouldn't be a judge for 30 years. It's not good for us. It's not good for America as well. So let's say the term will be 12 years, number one. Number two, I believe that the Knesset should have the override ability over some decisions, depends on the details, of the court, generally speaking, on issues of identity, where human rights and the rights of minority are not the essence. If it is the essence, I do not trust the Knesset, I trust the court, obviously. I hope on this we agree. Human rights should not be invested in the majority. The majority is the problem. But issues where human rights is not the most important part of the issue, but the character of the state, the Jewishness of the state, or the democratic aspect of the state, is the main issue, like the issue of the draft of the ultra-Orthodox, for example, then I think the last word should be invested with the parliament. Now you may agree, you may not agree, we can talk about details, we can ask ourselves in specific issue, who should be the one to decide. I have my opinion. But Obviously, to me, to take the judiciary, politicize it, like America, but obviously you compare elephant with a zebra when you compare Israel to America on these issues, where you have constitution over there, you have two houses of the parliament, etc., etc., etc. You cannot compare it at all. In Israel, you have the only way to protect me is the court. So on human rights, they should have the last word. So this is the beginning of discussion of how to balance it.
Dr. Koppel, are you in favor at all to compromise?
So let me make a few things clear. First of all, I'm not a politician. I'm the head of a think tank. We write position papers. So we wrote position papers on judicial appointments. We wrote position papers on the authority of the Attorney General, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not the author of the judicial reform. My think tank is the author of position papers. So it's not a matter of am I willing to compromise or not. This isn't my judicial reform.
You say there was no reason to block your offices in Jerusalem and to condemn you in the media.
Okay, let's not jump from one issue to the other here. Yes. So first of all, let me just tell you what I've been doing since the judicial reform came out. Okay, there were other think tanks in this country. Yedidia happens to be the head of one of them. There were others that are further to the left of him. And I've been sitting and speaking to my counterparts in think tanks in Israel that are vehemently opposed to the judicial reform, trying to work out compromises. So the question isn't if I'm in favor of compromise, that's all I do is work on compromise. The question is, though, what are the principles that are important and
so
on which we can't compromise?
Educate us. What do you suggest? How do you suggest to compromise this?
Okay, so let's talk. First, we need to know what's in the reform rather than talking vaguely about the reform. So let me just tell you what's actually in it. Okay, so one of the problems, I need one bit of background that I didn't get to, is that in Israel, the court decided that the Attorney General, who is simply a bureaucrat, is an appointed official. The Attorney General in Israel is the boss of the government. When the Attorney General tells the Prime Minister or any minister or the cabinet that this is what they have to do, they're actually, according to the court, they are legally bound to do it. Moreover, when the Attorney General, when somebody sues the government and the government needs to be defended in court, the one who defends them is the Attorney General or some proxy for the Attorney General. And if the Attorney General disagrees, he'll just go into court, and this actually happens, and say, my client is wrong. Okay, so that effective, this happened this week, by the way, okay? The Defense Minister Gallant, who has the authority to decide whether or not to allow Palestinians who are not citizens of the State of Israel to come into the State of Israel, he has the authority to decide. He decided that he did not want particular Palestinians coming in for some particular purpose. And the Attorney General, who was an appointment of the previous government, the Attorney General said, no, you're wrong. You can't do that. You don't have the authority to do that. Now, he does have the authority to do that, but she said he can't do it. I don't know if the argument is that the decision is unreasonable. It doesn't matter. She just said you can't do it. She was wrong on the substance. It's wrong that she should have the authority to do that. The case went to court. She came before the court and said, my client is wrong, so that in fact there were two sides in the court, both arguing in the same direction against Gallant, and of course the decision was against Gallant. Okay, so that's another. Now, so the first thing that needs to be done is that we need to define the authority of the Attorney General. The Attorney General should not be the boss of the government, and if the Attorney General doesn't agree with the government's position, then the government should take another lawyer who should go to court on their behalf, okay? This is not extreme, this is completely obvious. Do you disagree with that?
I'll elaborate in a minute. I will.
Okay.
Next.
So on that issue...
Maybe we can compromise here.
If you ask...
I can talk about
and
this
reach an agreement.
No. You want me to respond?
Please.
Sure. Listen. The Attorney General is not an advisor to the government in the sense that a private lawyer When I have a dispute, I take a private lawyer, and he or she is supposed to serve my purposes. This is not the case. This is not the case. Because in my specific individual case, it's my interest, my money, my freedom. But when you talk about the government, they're using my money, not their money. They're using the public sphere, which is ours, everybody's. So whenever they apply a policy, they were elected to apply a policy, obviously, but they cannot do what they want like a private person. They have to act for the public good. And who will be the one who will make sure that they will not do something against the public good because they want whatever achievements they want to achieve? So there's a difference. You're obviously right, but let me finish. What I'm saying is there's a balance here. There's a tension between, yes, they were elected to perform, and they should perform, and that's why they are there. But there are limits, and who will put the limit? On a daily basis, not going to the court every day.
Dr. Koppel, you believe that the attorney, the legal advisor should be limiting the powers?
So we need legal advisor, and the client of the legal advisor is the Israeli public. Shilton HaChok, the rule of law. Now, please, let's make it like, remember what Rabbi said? Let's do it this way. So I believe we should have somebody taking care of my interest as part of the Israeli wider society, disregarding the question whether I voted for these politicians or voted to the other one. Now again, Moshe, it's a question of balancing it. For example, I would say, just to finish the point, I would say that the legal advisors of the ministries, okay, should be elected by some kind of agreement with a specific minister, not by him, but with his or her participation, and there are ways of doing it easily, I think. Number one, because I want the minister to feel comfortable with the one who's serving under his authority. But this one should not be selected by the minister solely, because then nobody will protect me, and I want to be protected.
Yedidia, I have a question for you. There are two people involved in this story. There's the Attorney General and there's the Minister or the Prime Minister, or whoever it is. And you simply assume that the person who got elected doesn't represent you. He just wants to do horrible things. And this Pakid, who God knows how he gets into this position, okay?
I know, not God, I know how.
I also know how you
No,
did
so it's
that.
easy.
Okay.
There's a committee.
Okay.
With agreements. And it's done by rules.
No, Yedidia. No, that's not the way it works. There's a committee of 5 people that have their own political interests, and it's headed by a Supreme Court justice, and they have their own institutional interests. But the point is this, again, you're assuming that the person who wants to harm you is the person who got elected. That person doesn't represent you. But that this Pakid, right, this bureaucrat, that person only has your interests in mind and doesn't have anybody else, right? That he just wants to do good. That you're already assuming the conclusion here. My assumption is that somebody who got elected is more likely to represent the public than somebody who got in through some political process that doesn't guarantee that that person is representative. Okay, I want to tell you a story now, okay? Since Yedidia insists that it's the Attorney General who has the public's interest in mind and the politicians who want to do bad. Let me tell you a story that happened a couple of years ago. It was during a transition government. I don't need to tell you because we only had transition governments for about 5 years. And the chief prosecutor, a guy by the name of Shai Nitsana, his term was coming to an end. When the chief prosecutor's term comes to an end, the justice minister has to appoint somebody instead of him, a new prosecutor. The justice minister at the time was Amir Ohana. He was a member of the Likud party, and he was going to appoint a new chief prosecutor. And the Attorney General, Avichai Mandelblit, comes and tells him, listen, you know, Barak already decided that anything that's unreasonable is illegal, right? So that you don't actually have to point to a law to say that something's illegal in Israel. You just have to say that it's unreasonable. And you also know that I'm the boss, okay? I get to tell you what to do. That's another decision of Barak. So I'm going to tell you what's reasonable. I'm going to tell you whom it would be unreasonable to appoint to be the chief prosecutor instead of Shai Nitsana. Okay? This is the person who's representing your interest, right, according to Yedidia, Avichai Mandelblit, the Attorney General. He says, now you remember Caligula's horse. That's the canonical example. I'm about to finish. The canonical example of somebody who, right, of an appointment that's unreasonable. Caligula appointed his horse to be consul. Who, in the eyes of Avichai Mandelblit, is outside the scope of reasonableness to be the chief prosecutor of the state of Israel? The answer is anybody whose name isn't Momi Lemberger, okay? That's it. He tells him, you are going to appoint Momi Lemberger. That's the Attorney General looking out for the interests of the citizens of the state of Israel.
I really cannot find any story which will portray the politicians in Israel in a bad way. So Moshe is right. Politicians in Israel are trustworthy. Each one of them is acting only for the good of the people. I was in Hapoel Yerushalayim game in basketball, recommended by the way, and the minister relevant, I'll not mention his name, but he was smart enough to admit that he's there for 3 halves. האות half, כוח, כסף, כבוד. So if this is a minister, we don't need legal advisors, that's for sure. I don't think we should go there, Moshe, into all these stories. There are stories all over the place. The question is not theoretical, practical, how to balance the power between 2 major gorillas. Okay? We have 2 major gorillas. Each one of them is okay, each one of them is a threat. And the question is, who will protect me against a specific gorilla, which is much bigger, gorilla, not chimpanzee, much bigger than the one you see as a threat. And we discuss now what will be the balance. But I want to go, if you allow me.
Okay.
Okay.
Very shortly.
Spiritually. Orthodox rabbis, that's what we are. You are, I'm not. Okay? So for me, there are 2 days in the whole year where spiritually I'm very moved. One is obviously Yom Kippur on a personal level. The other is Yom HaAtzmaut on a national level. And every Erev Yom HaAtzmaut, I go to daven in Park Teddy, which is not far away from here, facing the walls. Amazing davening. Should come next Yom HaAtzmaut just for this. I'm telling you. We started there many years ago. We were only 40 people. Last Yom HaAtzmaut, I mean a few days ago, about 5,000, 6,000, I don't know how many, packed, the team and non the team, all together. Some kind of dynamic separation between men and women. Dynamic, because not everybody knows the rule. But very spiritual. Now, every Yom HaAtzmaut, just before davening, somebody is talking to the people, the transition from Yom HaZikaron to Yom HaAtzmaut. This time, it was somebody, Yoram Cohen, who used to be the head of the Shabak years ago, a religious guy. Well, obviously very smart, very experienced, knowledgeable. And he talked the way you suppose he will talk. He talked about his friends who fell in combat. Very moving. Then he did a mistake. And he was starting to say a few sentences about this issue. But we have to protect democracy. Israel is Jewish, democratic, and now there is a threat. Obviously, he did a wrong move. But then I saw in the crowd so many people who just 20 seconds ago they were brothers, like you said, brothers, obviously. Ayita Sham, okay, you saw it, so there's a testimony here, don't trust me. And it comes from inside. And there was not hate, maybe it's too much, but people were furious. We have to handle the discussion about the balance of power between the Israeli authorities in a way that will not tear us apart, and this is not the situation right now.
So just
Nitsana, you asked me a question, and I started the answer, but I didn't finish it, and it's important that I should finish it, which was about compromise, and am I willing to compromise? Okay, so let me just say very briefly. So first of all, it should be clear that, there were two separate processes going on. One is people who were actually very interested in the details of this, trying to figure out an arrangement by which we could all live together. There would be sufficient reform that people wouldn't be threatened by an unchecked court and also not by an unchecked Knesset or government. I'm fairly convinced that Yedidia and I, if we sat down and discussed this, we could probably come to reasonable compromise that we could both live with, and probably...
Maybe we should try it.
Okay. Anyway, you know I would love to do this with you, but I actually did it with other people who were considerably to your left, and we actually did reach compromises. And so you asked me what they are. I'll tell you what they are, and Yedidia can say if he agrees or disagrees.
That's true, but we have to end this panel. No? 10 more minutes? Wow, we're gracious. Thank you.
Okay.
So go ahead.
So let's do it. Yedidia, you could vote yay or nay on.
We'll do a ping pong.
Or I can raise my issues as well. Okay.
Yeah, you could. You could. Okay. So, all right. The first thing is, the Attorney General's rulings are not binding on the government, but we can let them be the default for those who are at the professional or bureaucratic level. But the government ultimately has the last word, not the Attorney General.
I would say the following: the Attorney General is binding. He should be selected the way he's being selected till now. However, when the government as a government says we want a different solution, we do not accept your view, they should be able to do that and to hire their own attorney to represent them in the court.
All right, so we're not too far apart on that. I think...
this is Agranat,
No, that's not Agranat, but I'm not going to argue with you about Agranat. Agranat did not say that the Attorney General has the last word at all.
Okay.
It's still in dispute in the court.
This is a dispute over facts.
Okay, exactly. Okay. Anyway, okay, so that's point number one. Let's move on. If the court wants to strike down an ordinary statute, it can do so, but it needs to sit on a full panel, and it needs a 2/3 majority. So we're talking about 10 out of 15.
And I would say 2/3 of 11.
Why 11?
This is...
Because 15 is unrealistic in many cases, and 15 gives relative power to 5. And I want to give this power only to 3 or 4. But
you know that Supreme Courts in other countries sit in the full panel on every case.
And I know what's going on in other countries. By the way, do you know, my friends, that the trust of the American people in the Supreme Court of America is much lower than the current situation in Israel. So don't rush to copy it.
Less than 25%?
That's an answer.
Oddly enough, people who loved the Supreme Court just 10 years ago suddenly find the Supreme Court to have way too much power in the United States. I find that very interesting. But
okay.
Yeah. Okay. And you know that the United States, everything is reversed, right? The progressives who think that the court should have more power here don't think so in the United States.
Before you continue interviewing me, just let me say, well, my friends, it's not a class in political science. What it may look like, it is not. You have to realize, the minute the court will be conservative, Israeli terms, Shamrani, Haaretz will be against the court. It's an issue. It's not the sharing of power. Right now, and Makor Rishon vice versa, don't be so proud here, okay? Obviously. What I'm saying is the following. Right now, the perception, listen to my word, the perception, reality is a different issue. The perception of the Israelis, most of Israelis, is that the court is liberal and the Knesset and the government are less liberal, And that's the issue. We're fighting about who will have the power, this ideology or the other ideology. The court is a platform. The Knesset is a platform. So if it will be a course in the university about sharing power in Israel, disregarding reality, it will be very easy to find a way. I believe so. But when you come to the issues itself and you translate it into the disputes, then you have the problem and the disagreements. And that's why so many Israelis are so furious right now, both ends, both sides. Not because of the court or the parliament, because of the issue, because we have disputes about the future of the state of Israel, about the vision of the state of Israel, about the end goal of Zionism in our generation, in our kids' generation. That's the issue. And what we are talking about is about the manifestation of the issue. Let's say Moshe and Yedidia will find a solution and miraculously to become a law in Israel. Do you think we solved any problem? We covered the specific lava coming from one place of the volcano. The lava of disagreement about the issues itself will come out another way. It's just a matter of time. What needs to be done, when we think, you think as spiritual leaders, what needs to be done is not how to balance the power in Israel. The issue is how to accept the view that the dispute between brothers in Israel is going to stay, as far as we can tell, for the next quarter of century, and how we can live together despite the disputes. To translate the idea of divided we stand, divided, not united, divided we stand, but we stand together. That's the spiritual, the educational, and also political challenge of our generation.
So we are not going to
Yedidia and I each wrote a constitution.
Unfortunately, we're not going to settle this crisis here. Let me end with a last question for both of you. It's a tough question, but please end with a happy note. And both of you.
Okay, so...
Are you... I didn't ask a question yet.
What? I thought that was the question.
My question is, are you guys afraid? Because we are sitting now in the president's house trying to reach a compromise. Most likely, it will not be achieved. Are you guys afraid of a constitutional crisis? And if so, how you propose to solve it?
Okay, yes, I'm afraid of a constitutional crisis. No, I don't think there's a good solution. That's why I think it's very important for the talks that are not actually at the president's house, but sponsored by the president. It's very important that they succeed. As I was saying, I'm completely certain that there's an equilibrium to be reached over here, right? There is an agreement to be had, and I more or less know what it is, okay? The gaps between me and Yedidia that you just heard are tiny, okay? They're easily closed. I'm quite certain that everybody in these talks understands where the compromise is. The question is only whether there is the political will to get to that compromise at the political level. At the conceptual level, there's no doubt that there's a compromise to be had.
Okay, I don't have a crystal ball, but very quickly. First of all, Israel deteriorated. It will be optimistic at the end. Israel deteriorated in the half a year from a place where nobody was questioning democracy to a place where democracy is an open-ended issue for Israel. In the perception, this is an amazing change which scares me, number one. The idea that Israeli soldiers would refuse was theoretically in the air always. Now, it's in the open space, the genie is out of the bottle, and everybody, unfortunately, will use it in the future. Terrible, terrible thing. The refusal cannot be accepted, but, so to speak, my camp, it's not my camp, but so to speak, my camp put it on the table, terrible mistake. And if it is powerful enough to stop democracy to work, and I'm with you on this, obviously, I do not want it. I think it's terrible. Wrong move, number 2. However, the optimistic side, so many Israelis hug the flag again. Both camps are hugging the flag again. I don't see the tycoons leaving the country. I talked to the heads of high-tech industry in Israel because they are on my side, so to speak, totally involved and care. And they have all the options to go elsewhere, easily. They are rooted here, they care. It's a good thing for us to know. The Israeli center, the sleeping beauty, was sleeping. Now Yariv Levin gave it a kiss. And the center is up. Very good news to everybody that the center is up. And the last optimistic thing, we Israelis, we are known for heroism in the battlefield. Whenever there's a battle, we're there and we fight. We are not so known on civil heroism. But what you see now, including yesterday, here in Yerushalayim, and every Motzei Shabbat, everywhere, you see civil heroism. It's no violence. Show me another country where 4% of the population is going out week after week, demonstrating against what they seem to be major threat to their lives. No violence. And kol hakavod to the police as well. It's not so clear that the police will be able to handle this the way they do. So it's not going to be easy, but nobody in next year's Seder, Leila Seder, will not sit with his or her family member just because they are on the other side of this dispute. And that's our strength.
Well, thank you very much for this fascinating discussion about this dilemma that caused a lot of fireworks in Israel in the past months, and there will be more. Hopefully next year, the only fireworks we'll see are the one in the night of the Independence Day. Thank you, Professor Stern. Thank you, Dr. Koppel. Thank you very much.